Went up to my room and lay down, and within a very few minutes discovered that I was paralysed down my side. The guy behind me was in a wheelchair. He was a double amputee, no legs below the knee. He tipped himself up onto his hands and he did the firework on his hands.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 78 of the Optimize Me Now podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Keeling, and I'm excited once again to be back here bringing great content with great guests to your earbuds. So before we get into introducing the guest for today, if you enjoy this show and you haven't already, please make sure you head over to iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen to this and subscribe to the show and leave us a review if you haven't already as well. It helps people find great content who are out there looking for it in the sea of content that exists today. And if you are a business owner, please make sure you go onto the Google Play Store or the App Store and download my Bulletproof Business app. You're looking for the bullet hole with the big shiny bee in the middle. It's full of content. You get these podcasts in there, but it's also full of forms, tools, and resources that can help you build a bulletproof business and do things better when you're growing and scaling your business over the next few months through years or whatever it might be. You also get direct access to me in there, and it is completely free. The first 1,000 users in the app get unlimited access for the lifetime of that they are users for all the content in there. So that's a great reason to head over to the Google Play Store or the App Store and get the app downloaded right away. So let's introduce today's guest. Today we have the wonderful Gina Gardiner on the show. She is a #1 best-selling author, a motivational speaker, empowerment and relationship coach, and transformational leadership trainer with well over 30 years of experience helping people experience happiness, success, and fulfillment. She's the founder of the Thrive Together Tribe membership and personal and spiritual development program and the Enlightened leadership program. Gina has learned to walk twice as an adult. For over 20 years, she ran her award-winning school for the most part from a wheelchair. The gift of this experience was the development of a unique approach to life and the development of transformational leadership. In 2004, Gina left Headship principal and has since worked with countless individuals, couples, teams and organizations, helping them to step into their potential, to learn the lessons from the past, and to recognize that it is their choice to step into their power and live a fearless life. Gina is passionate about supporting people to live a truly happy, successful, and fulfilling life. A truly fantastic and amazing woman. Please join me in welcoming Gina to the show. How's it going, Gina?
It's going great, thank you. And thank you very much for having me on the show.
My
Brilliant.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for taking the time out to come and talk to us today. So just from reading your bio there, it sounds like you've been through one hell of a journey, not least that you've learned to walk, learned to walk twice in your life. So where did it all begin? Where did all this start?
I suppose I have to start when I started teaching. And for the first time in my life, I found something that I loved and was good at. I was promoted very early and I became the deputy head of the largest junior school in the district when I was 28. And I was appointed to be the catalyst for change. I was the youngest bar 2 on the staff. And for the first few months, we were busy planning and getting things sorted out. And so I was really relieved to go off skiing in the February half term. Now, in those days, the style of skiing was that you went for the longest skis possible. And I had a new pair of skis for Christmas, and I was convinced to buy skis that were 10 centimetres longer than I was used to. So went to St Anton, and I managed to wrap those 10 centimetres of ski around my neck several times during the week. And on the last day, I said to my friends, I'm just going to go and have a quiet ski. I'm going to get my confidence back. I'd had a really bad fall the day before. And they met me for lunch and they said, we found this fabulous new run, come with us. And it was one of those days, I don't know if you ski, but it was beautiful sunshine. I mean, the most amazing scenery. And off we went on the stair lift up to the top of the mountain. And I dutifully followed them. We hadn't gone very far when I recognised that this wasn't the run that they were expecting. And instead of being on this beautiful red run that went for 2 kilometres, we were at the top of the Schindlergratz, which is the most difficult black run in St Anton.
Oh, blimey.
So it was very steep and it was full of moguls. Now, moguls are where the weather has carved out lumps and eroded the snow. And they can be like cobbles, just an inch or so, but these were monsters. So it was a very steep and it was full of 6-foot moguls. And the only way to ski was to turn on the top of the mogul and then slide down it and then go along the gully and then do the same coming back. And I'd lost my nerve about a third of the way down, and I'd got into the powder snow and I'd fallen. And it took me quite a while to ski to my friends who were sitting rather like, elves sitting on a mushroom, each on a mogul. Took my skis off and we were just talking. As I said, it was a beautiful sunny day, and the top of the mogul gave way. And I rotated out, there was nowhere to land. And I'm told I fell between 150 and 200 feet.
Blimey.
When I woke up, and I think it was very fortunate that I blacked out because I was floppy. It took a long time for people to ski to me. The one good thing about it is between the 2 falls and the bit of skiing, I'd done most of the black run. I was determined not to use the blood wagon. So with their help, I made it back to the hotel. It's in a bit of a state. And the next day we flew back to England. My mum took one look at me and I was carted off to A&E, and I was told that I'd got a bad concussion and that I'd trapped a nerve in my neck. Fast forward 6 weeks, and I was given permission by the medics to go on the borough ski party. We had 150 children, and off I went. We had a doctor go with us, which is why I was allowed to go. But as the week went on, I became more and more like Quasimodo. And on the last day, the children did all of their skiing. And I got back to the hotel and said to my colleagues, I'm going to have to lie down. Went up to my room and lay down. And within a very few minutes, discovered that I was paralysed down one side.
Oh, blimey.
I didn't want to frighten the children. And so I had to wait until somebody came to find how I was.
How long was it? How long did you have to wait?
Well, how it felt and the reality, I have no idea. How it felt was forever. Those minutes were scary and long. In reality, we're probably talking 10 minutes, maybe 20.
Right.
But when you're in that situation, time has a way of redefining itself, if that makes sense.
How did you feel in those 10, 20 minutes? What was going through your mind?
I think probably fear was the biggest feeling. What the hell is going on? I always relied on my body. I mean, my nickname before all of this was Tigger, because I used to bounce around like a lunatic with loads of energy. And then when your body doesn't do what you want it to, and I have to say that's a theme that, because this is only the start of the story, it's one of those things that we take so much for granted until it's taken away from us.
And did you correlate it to what had gone on the slopes? Did you correlate it to the accident that you'd had?
Not at that time. No. I mean, I suppose at one level I did, because although I was much better than I had been immediately after the initial accident, I wasn't right. But there's a difference between not feeling right and then suddenly finding that actually you can't move. I thought I'd had a stroke. And so I think your mind just focuses on don't panic, don't make a noise. I didn't want, because there were children in the corridor and things, somebody will come. And I think those words sort of go round and round in your head in terms of you're stuck in this, almost like an old-fashioned, vinyl record. You're stuck in the loop of what the hell's happening. Somebody will come. It'll be all right, I hope. What the hell's happening? Somebody will come. It'll be all right, I hope, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And how old were you at this point?
I was 28.
28, wow.
Anyway, I was carted off to hospital. I was in Geneva hospital for several days, and then I was flown home. And that was in the March, and it took me until the end of May to get back to school. And I did regain my mobility, but what I didn't do is regain my energy and my strength. I sort of limped to the end of a school term doing school and bed, and was really relieved to get to the end of the school term, thinking I've got 6 weeks now, I can really focus on getting myself fit. 2 weeks into the holiday, I had a phone call very early in the morning, and it was from my head teacher's wife to say that she'd suddenly found him dead in bed.
Oh my goodness.
So far from it being a restful holiday, I helped her because she was, you can imagine, just shocked and bereft. I helped her sort out the funeral, contacted everybody, had to contact all the staff, the parents, the local authority. And when I went back to school in September, I was the acting head, and I was appointed to be the permanent head in the January. And I made a decision quite consciously that I wanted the school to be successful. I'd not been happy at school myself. And I wanted children to have the best learning opportunity and the best environment where they could thrive. But I also wanted the same for my staff. And so that decision was quite a conscious one, as I remember it, and that I was going to do everything that I could to make that happen. And so there are two parallels to this. One is in terms of the school, which was incredibly successful. I'll talk about that in a minute. The other was about the wrestling with my physical health. And so for 2 or 3 years, I was walking, but getting more and more fatigued and resisting using a wheelchair. You know, what will people think? Will the parents think that I can run the school? Will the teachers think I can run the school? Will the children take any notice of me? And that came to a head when, in the summer holidays, it always seems to be the summer holidays, when I and some friends went to Wisley, the gardens, and I managed to walk to the kiosk, but I wouldn't hire a wheelchair. So I sat in the car park for 2 hours while they went round.
Wow.
And then sat there thinking to myself, what are you doing? Why won't you get into that wheelchair? And it was because my concern of what other people would think. As it happened, events overtook me, and within a very short time, I was using a wheelchair in school. And to start with, I used the wheelchair to get around school, but didn't use it in the classrooms or in my office. I could walk in those.
Yeah.
Fast forward to 1996, just before the summer holidays. The summer holidays are a theme here. And I sneezed, and I felt something go in my back. And over the next 2 or 3 weeks, I deteriorated. And on the last day of term, I went to get up from I had a seat that's at standing height in the hall. I went to get up, and I couldn't stand up. My legs just gave way.
Wow. And how old were you at this point? This is a few years later.
This is, so I'm now 31.
Wow. So at 31, effectively paralysed from the waist down.
Well, no, I wasn't paralysed, but my legs would move, but they wouldn't hold me up.
Okay. So this is going on for a few years now then. Were you under some sort of medical supervision or having any physio or treatment?
The doctors, I was under a neurologist, were looking for, there was patently something going on, but they couldn't work out what. Yeah. And so I would have a test, and then the body would fall apart, and that was the pattern, really. And I had, between 1983 and 1996, to start with, I had lots of tests, but each time I did the test, I got worse. And so in 1989, I'd made the decision to keep away from doctors. And apart from a once-a-year checkup with a neurologist, I did my best to distance myself as far as possible, because every time they touched me, I got worse.
Right.
So it turned out that I'd ruptured a disc. Sneezes are very powerful. I had the disc removed, but when I woke up, I couldn't put my left foot to the floor without fainting.
Gosh.
And what had happened is that I had failed back surgery syndrome. And it took me 18 months to walk to the bottom of my very small garden. And by the Easter of not the next year, but 1998, I had managed to walk to the bottom of my garden. Fast forward to the last day of the summer term. And I wasn't very well, but I went into school. My way of dealing with things, it was, however I'm feeling, I go into school. Because that way I don't have to make that decision in the morning, because mornings are like resurrection. Even now, I'm not good in the mornings. Anyway, I got home, we had a staff do, and I came home and I was sick and I felt something go in my back and I'd ruptured another disc.
Oh, blimey.
When I woke up from that, what I discovered was that, again, I'd got failed back surgery syndrome. And in this case, I couldn't stand. So I was completely wheelchair bound rather than being a stalk. Now, what I did then, after the first operation, within 4 or 5 days of coming out of hospital, I was back at school. And people have said to me, "Aren't you brave?" I was probably stupid. But for me, I could stay at home and watch daytime television. And I don't know about you, but it's never done it for me.
No.
If somebody hadn't filled the kettle and put a cup within my reach, I couldn't make myself a cup of tea. Or I could go into school, I could be productive, do something I loved and was good at. My mouth worked, my brain worked, my hands worked. There were people there who could lift and carry. So for me, it was a no-brainer. Why wouldn't I go and do something that I found eminently useful, or stay at home and just be disabled?
Was there a concern there then that if you just stayed at home, you would cognitively, mentally just start to waste away and pull back from things? I don't think
that was a conscious thought. It was just, remember, I'd got several years where and that's why I'd shared that in the morning, no decision to make. I go into school and I go and do something that has purpose and that I'm good at and that I enjoy. So in a sense, it was a follow-on from that. Why am I sitting at home when actually all of the faculties that I need in order to run my school are working perfectly well? So I started for 3 weeks, I think I did part-time, and then I was full-time. I have to say, bearing in mind that's September, I went to see the surgeon in May, who said, "We'll talk about you going back part-time a couple of hours a week." And I just laughed. Because if you think about it, school was already set up. I'd got my wheelchair. I'd got an electric wheelchair at school. To start with, I couldn't drive, but I would be taken by taxi, and my site manager would come and collect me from the taxi or bring the chair to me so I could take myself in. Why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I go and do something that was of value? Rather than, and I mean, please don't think I'm criticizing anybody who is at home and who is disabled. I had the choice. I had the setup where I could go in and be productive. By this time, the fact that I was in a wheelchair was a non-issue. The school had been made, those bits that weren't accessible had been made accessible, and I had a setup that allowed me to go in and be productive.
Did it make a difference then that your position in the organisation, in the school, that you were relatively high up and the head of the school?
I couldn't have been a class teacher. There is no way I could have been a class teacher. And the reason for that is there was no room in the classrooms for my wheelchair.
Yeah.
And therein lies the gift. Because I had to develop a very different approach to empowering people and developing leadership, which did not rely on me standing behind them. Or getting into classrooms, because I couldn't. Even if I could get through the door, I couldn't. And so this is my disability. And I think there have been many. I have to say that I don't want people to go away with thinking I've taken it lightly. There were days when it was fairly bloody, and I was, it felt dark, and there were tears and all of that. But getting people to take radical responsibility for their own performance and shared responsibility for everybody else's was a really important factor in the school's success. And we were incredibly successful. We had lots of accolades, but including one of the first beacon schools, one of the first 75 schools to become a beacon school, which meant that I and my staff worked with hundreds of other teachers and dozens of other schools, helping them raise standards too. But also that we were cited by Her Majesty's Inspector, the HMI, as being one of the best 100 schools in England, not once but twice during my tenure.
That's fantastic.
And for me, the reason that became so was this principle that in order to lead, you have to lead yourself first. that whatever your position, whether you are the deputy head, the teacher, you're the senior person, or you're the cleaner that cleans the toilets, having pride in what you do and being the best professional in that role, and recognizing that you have a very important role to play, was hugely instrumental in the school being successful. And, I can remember young teachers particularly who would perhaps be dismissive of site staff. And I'd say to them, do you ever smell the boys' toilets? Believe me, I've been in schools where the boys' toilets follow you around the school. Would you like to go be teaching in a place which was dirty? Do you want to do it?
It's such an important job, isn't it? It's
dismissed, but for me, it's pretty fundamental.
Yeah, absolutely.
And getting everybody to recognise that no matter what their role, and the pupils, because they've got a role in their learning too, and their role is that they've got to be open to learning, open to the possibility, and give it their best shot. And so for me, that principle became like Brighton Rock running through the school. I was also doing a number of roles outside school, partly to help the budget because it was dire. We were budgeted at the bottom of the pile per capita per child. And I didn't do all these roles at once, but each of them gave an opportunity for me to develop new ideas, new skills. So I was an advisor on the workforce reform programme for the government. I worked as a trainer facilitator for the National College of Leadership and for the London Institute. I was an Ofsted inspector, all sorts of things. So when I left school and my health was deteriorating, I was working a 15-hour day, 5.5 days a week. And that was great physical pain control, because when I was doing my work and I loved what I was doing, I could turn the body off. But my health was deteriorating, and I was given an ultimatum by the neurologist, basically. You've got to stop what you're doing, otherwise within a year to 18 months, you will be housebound, not able to drive, and your sight is beginning to be affected. So take notice now. I've been telling you for years, but now you've reached crunch time.
So let's just go back a little bit to the way that you had to manage the team there, the staff, the pupils, and how you approached work. Because what you've described there is something I see a lot in organizations in the business world as well, in terms of the culture in the business and how the directors, the board lead their team and lead their clients almost as well. What did you do that set your school apart from everybody else's in the way that you managed, in the way that you led everybody in that school?
That's a really good question, and it's not one thing. And I think it's important that those 3D jigsaw puzzles of tins of beans. It's a bit like that.
Yeah.
The first thing is you have to model the values and the behaviours that you want from other people. It's no good telling people you've got to work hard if you don't. It's no good telling people, we don't do moody if one day you're all hail fellow, well met, and the next day that you're grumpy. You've got to be really clear about what the vision is, and you've got to get ownership of that vision. What's the why? And if everybody's engaged in the why, you don't always know how you're going to achieve it to start with. But if that's like the lighthouse that keeps you going, then you keep coming back to that. For me, leadership is all about integrity. You've got to, if you say you're going to do something, you've got to do it. Or if there's a problem with that, you've got to let people know, and it's got to be a really good reason. You've got to provide an environment where people are expected to trust and respect one another. And part of that was creating a shared language, because we use these words, we bandy them about, but what do they mean? And so part of this was part of the training for the whole staff, and then looking at it in different ways for different sectors of the staff. What do we mean by excellence in this school? Let's unpick it. What does that mean in terms of relationships with the children or relationships with one another? What does it mean in terms of teaching or how the building looks or what we're trying to achieve?
And were these conversations that you had with the team as a whole?
They were conversations that became daily part of everybody's vocabulary.
Right.
set off in whole staff meetings, but then also done through training programs. And please don't think it started off like this, because it didn't. Most of the time it started off because there was a problem, and necessity is the mother of invention. We needed to sort it out. But there was a sequential training program for everybody on the staff, all in their own time, okay? But people wanted it because they found it was relevant to them and it was useful. So let me give you a couple of examples of what I meant. Whole school training. My school was in Romford. Anybody who knows Romford knows it's not an easy area. There's quite a lot of inherent racism, and it's quite what I call an aggressive area. You know, the driving's aggressive. In the supermarket, if people push their trolleys into you, the first thing is to go oi rather than okay. I wanted my school to have zero tolerance of aggression, okay? Now, that doesn't mean that there never was any aggression, but zero tolerance of it. In order for that to work, every member of staff had to be squeaky clean, because it's no good saying we've got a zero tolerance of aggression if one of the staff was ready to have a go aggressively at one of the children or each other or whatever.
Yeah.
So I did training for everybody about, if we're going to be an aggressive-free zone, what does that mean? And how do you manage difficult people? How do you manage your own emotions when somebody's being a pain in the what's-it? Because make no mistake, there are times when children know exactly which buttons to press.
Yes.
And, you know, teaching's a fabulous job when the children are with you, but it's the worst job in the world if you happen to have a class of children on the third wet afternoon, having been in 3 lunchtimes, and the wind is up and they're in a mood, because you've really got to work hard. So you have to be able to manage not to be aggressive on the day when the cat's been sick, when the car won't go right, when you've just had your bank statement and you realise that you're not as well off as you think you are. If you can manage to be even-tempered on those days, then you're all right. The result of that is when children were aggressive, I or any member of staff could say, we don't see us doing that, and we don't expect it from you.
Mm.
When a parent came in and was aggressive, we were able to say, if you look at the handbook, we don't tolerate aggression. We will listen to you, absolutely promise we will listen to you, but not while you're hollering and shouting. So let's make you a cup of tea, get yourself together, and then we'll hear you.
So it all hinges around meaningful and successful conversation, doesn't it?
Yeah, and setting the expectations. And our expectations were set from the advert. And then at the interview, I would say to people, now, before we go into the interview, you know, if you want to come here, you've got to be hardworking. You've got to want to learn. You've got to want to be part of a team. We don't do moody. Leave your ego under your pillow with your pajamas, okay? Now, if that's okay, we'll go ahead with the interview. Now, if they were appointed, then I think this is where lots and lots of leaders lose out. They don't close the circle. The expectations were really, really clear. But as soon as a behaviour was not in line with expectations, people were taken gently to one side to say, do you remember the interview?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember we talked about not being moody or need to be a good team member? That isn't good team membership, or that's being moody. We don't want that here. And then giving the support and help to grow if they needed it. So as a result, not only was everybody was very clear about where the boundary was, but also, and one of the nicest things somebody said to me, you know, as they were leaving is, you know, this has been an amazing experience. And one of the things I really value is that you could tell me that I was doing things wrong, but do it in a way that helped me grow rather than a way that knocked me down. That's
so important as well, is being prepared to have what's often perceived as difficult conversations around things that you don't really, you know, no one wants confrontation, do they? No one wants to deal with things that are difficult, but it's so important to go there with people, but go there in the right way that helps to build them up while still dealing with the problem.
For me, it's the difference between confronting the issue and being confrontational. I don't believe there's ever a need to be confrontational, But I do believe you need to confront the issue. And what most people do is they leave it, and they leave it until they are so angry or so frustrated that it becomes confrontational.
It just builds up and adds this negative energy, and then it just gets to a point where, unfortunately, it can spill over and explode, and that doesn't help anybody.
No. And one of the things that really concerns me is the level of toxicity there is around the world in terms of the quality of leadership. And it's a major reason for creating the Enlightened Leadership Programme, which uses all of the strategies and all of the principles that I developed in school. And since 2005, I've been using with businesses. I know they work. And for me, the big difference is you've got to work on the person first. Lots of leadership programs work on the strategies. But if you are somebody who's easily frustrated, if you fly off the handle, if you don't walk your talk, no matter how many leadership programs you've been on, it's not going to change anything. And the research is quite chilling, really. 6 months after a leadership program, between 7 and 10% of what was taught is being used.
Wow.
Now, that's not my research, but that's scary. You think of how much resource is being used in order to develop leadership. And if it's not being used 6 months later, then most of that's wasted. So for me, fundamentally, you start with the person.
So what's going wrong there with those programs? If only less than 10% of what's being taught is actually still being in use 6 months down the line, what's going wrong in those programs? What needs to be done differently?
I think there's several things. The first is they do not actually work on the person taking radical responsibility for their thoughts, and our thoughts generate our emotions, our behaviors, and our language. They don't help people to recognize that actually they're not victims, that they are in control of their lives, that every choice they make, everything they do is a choice, and every choice has consequences. And even not choosing and letting things just drift is actively a choice. And they often have the most far-reaching consequences. So if you go on a leadership program, that's a tick box for the company. But in reality, if it's not touched that inner person, if they've not actually made, if you like, done the personal and spiritual work about themselves, then it's going to have very limited effect. Now, of course, that requires you to be brave enough to do the inner work. And that's one of the reasons why, for me, the program had to be 10 months with support right the way through the program. Because sometimes when you're facing limiting beliefs, for example, that can be really challenging because those beliefs have been held by you since you were tiny. Lots of leaders suffer from imposter syndrome. Now, I was listening to something the other day and it really struck me. The difference between highly successful people and not is not that they don't feel fear. It's that they fear the outcome of not trying more than they fear not doing anything. And I think we all feel fear. And for most of it, it's because we're stepping into something that's unfamiliar. And, unfamiliar isn't necessarily bad. We're hot-wired, aren't we, since cavemen, that something that's unfamiliar is inherently a threat. But we're living in the 21st century. And I think it's time for people to recognize that these are not threats like a saber-toothed tiger. They are threats in terms of the quality of your thinking. And they are a threat to the quality of your life and the people around you. And so for me, this is leadership for life, because by doing that inner work, not only are you going to be a better leader, your business, for me, it's crazy. It makes such business sense that if you're getting the best out of you and your people, productivity goes up, profitability goes up, less absenteeism, better work-life balance. Why wouldn't you invest in doing that? But of course, it takes work, and it takes doing something that's not familiar.
It starts with you, doesn't it? It's how can, if you're operating at 60% of your potential, how can you possibly expect to inspire a team to operate any more than that? Usually your team are somewhere below the level that you're operating at.
Yeah. And if you think, In the UK alone, £70 billion is lost in days absent due to stress. They think that presenteeism, and we don't talk about presenteeism, that's people who have gone to work, but they're not firing on all cylinders. And because they're stressed or anxious or depressed, their quality of their relationships, the quality of their decision making is affected. That has huge impacts in terms of the quality of your output, your customer service, your capacity to do well. And I know, because I work consistently with businesses, and within a year, they are all more productive. They're more profitable, and they have hugely better work-life balance and relationships.
Oh, productivity and profitability go hand in hand, and the number of people who turn up to work who are actively engaged is so low these days. It's scary.
Yeah. And so for me, it's a huge sense of drive, a sense of purpose, because out of that problem with people not being engaged, with people being stressed, the knock-on effect to themselves in terms of their health and well-being is very well documented. But then you look at the cost to their family, to their children, that you're not a present parent because actually you're so busy trying to deal with your stuff about work. The knock-on effect economically to your family, and then think about the knock-on effect to the national health and to all of those things outside work. We've got to do something different. And for me, I have this mission. It's a huge mission to positively impact on 1 million people in the next 5 years, and to do that through looking at transforming leadership. Because if you transform the leader, I won't be touching 1 million people. But just think how many people in any organization the leader impacts on, and then their family and their community. And I'm really passionate about helping people step into their genuine power, which is not about diminishing somebody else. It's about wanting to nurture and support other people to grow too. And I'm looking for participants who want to take part in the program, but also affiliates who really believe in this and who are going to help create this. I mean, we live in such troubled times, don't we?
We do, and and especially leaders. I say to my clients in business organizations, everything in your business is a direct result of you. Everything trickles down from you, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything, because it's all as a result of the decisions that you've made or not made, as you rightly say. Even not making a decision is kind of making a decision. And it's really frustrating to hear business leaders talk about that problem member of staff, and they're this, they're that, they're the other. It's like, well, were they that way when you hired them? If they were, what were you doing hiring them? And if they weren't, what the hell have you done to them since they started working for you that's made them that way? You have to take it. You're absolutely right. It all starts with taking personal responsibility. And it was one of the most important lessons I've learned in my life is the things that I'm most fearful of or anxious about. If I move towards those things and develop myself in those areas, that's where I can have the biggest difference for myself. And the better I become, and the more I uncover about myself, the better I can be for my family, for my colleagues, for my clients, for the whole world.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. I was working with a hotel, and I've been working with the general manager. And he had fired the third F&B manager in just under a year. And so when I started working with him, my question to him was, why has it happened? And he went, well, he didn't do this and he did do this. And I said, well, no, why did it happen? And it's when he started to think about, actually, did I appoint the right people? Were they inducted effectively? Was I clear about what my expectation was of them and why? And did I monitor and hold that to account, give feedback, give training and support? And the answer is no. And so he's about to appoint somebody else, and the approach that is going into that is very, very different. And I think it's hard. It's so easy to think, poor me, I've got to put up with those people who are a real pain. I'll give you another example. I work with a dental laboratory. And they make, when I first started working with them, it was £500,000 worth of teeth. They now make nearly £900 worth of teeth in a year. But when they started, everybody worked in silos. They started very early in the morning, very often worked till late at night. Since I've been working with them, and since the director, who also works on a practical basis in the business as a technician, and work with him about recognizing that it's him that makes the difference, and that he manages himself. He was a typical example of that. He would get frustrated, and his biggest frustration was that everybody was at him. They wanted him to check this. They wanted him to look at this. Is this okay? And it was constantly interrupting him. When he recognized actually he was feeding the habit he didn't want, he needed to teach his team to think for themselves and have confidence and a culture where everybody was learning, and if they got it wrong, it was a learning opportunity. Now, if they got it wrong time and time again, that was something different. Now they work as a team. They don't start till 8. They rarely finish after 5. They often go off to the pub on a Friday afternoon, and yet they're making almost twice as many teeth than they did before.
I've seen that so much. What in your eyes, what were the things that he was doing that was feeding into that problem?
One is that he did not manage himself. So he was very, very friendly one minute, and then because somebody was doing or not doing something that he wanted, he'd get irritated, and then it'd explode. So the staff didn't know whether they were coming or going. He also, what he has done is that he's so busy working on the business before we started working together that he couldn't see the wood for the trees. So part of it was the seemingly naive question: why is it you do that? Why is it you're so, that it is so, you do that and you do that and you do that and you do that. And now on Thursdays is development day. And although they're doing their normal work, everybody, even the person who is the least experienced, they have a role in teaching other people what they're doing and researching new things. Now it's going on all the week, but whatever happens on Thursday is development day.
Yeah.
The staff are more engaged. They talk about how much they enjoy it. They're working less hours. They're now on a salary, not on piecework. And his fear previously was if they're on salary, they won't work hard enough. The reality has been the opposite. And that now when somebody goes on holiday, there's not a big gap because somebody's gone and their line of work's disappeared. It's easy for the team to accommodate. If there's a difficult case, then those who are appropriate gather around and determine how they're going to approach it. And as a result, they save a lot of time. Now, it doesn't matter what the business does, what the widgets are, the principles of, if you are a leader, whether you're the leader of the company or you're a leader of a team, the principles are pretty much the same. That actually you have to take the lead. And so part of what this guy's done is he's been gathering the opportunity for people to develop the confidence. He now works with them in a different way. So instead of immediately answering their question, what do you think?
Brilliant.
And they've been trained. So, okay, let's look at what you've done. Where do you think you might improve that? Instead of simply saying, yeah, that's good enough, or no, do that.
And that alone makes such a big difference, especially in business, with kids, in life and relationships in general. Yeah, 100%, rather than, because as I said, I've seen that so many times where the business owner, the business leader is so frustrated with having people coming to them all the time saying, what should I do here? What should I do with this? It's like, why can't they just get it done or figure it out or whatever it might be? Whereas really, if you just take the time when you can to coach that person and throw it back at them almost and ask them a great question, it's like, well, I think you could figure this out on your own. What would, if you had to, what would you do? And coach them through that process. You're giving them the tools to be their own leader, to be successful in their own right. And that's when you build this culture where you don't have to be there all the time because they've got the tools they need to work it out.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think of people who've got young children, that when they're at the toddler stage and you're wanting them to dress themselves and they put the boots on the wrong feet. And if you don't take the time to let them explore and to develop, the worry would be that at 28, they still can't dress themselves.
Yeah.
But parents at some point recognize that you need to invest that time. And actually, in many ways, if you're the boss of the business or you're the leader of the team, and I don't mean this in a patronizing way, but in some ways, you have a role of a parent. And that role of the parent is to support that growth and then to be able to give them the space to fly in a safe way, that where they're able to learn. And that failure, for me, there's two failures. One is the failure to give it a go. And the second is the failure to learn when things don't go right. But all of us learn better when things go wrong.
Yes.
And yet we are so fearful of failure. Now, let me get this straight. If you are a brain surgeon and you were operating on my brain, or you're a pilot and you're flying my plane, I want no margin for error. Okay?
I think we can all agree on that.
But very rarely are we in the circumstance that giving young, inexperienced, or young and or inexperienced, because people be I'm 66 and I'm still learning technology. We had a conversation of that before. So it's not about age, it's about experience. But if you can't give people the environment, the culture where it's safe to give it a try, get it wrong, learn and put it right, then you are missing out on a huge well of potential that is there.
You've got to be able to let them get it wrong and then figure out how to put it right. That's where the real learning happens, and it really embeds and it lasts.
But creating those opportunities can sometimes be a bit difficult in a business. I think that's sometimes where people like yourself and me come in very helpful, because we can help create a scenario where it feels safe to the leader and they can then get the success that happens, and then they can fly themselves.
Yes.
You know, for me, being an enlightened leader means that you are always looking how you can, first of all, recognize the potential in others, because so many people are so busy looking down, they don't see that. But also then recognize that one size doesn't fit all. That, you know, looking for the potential in Fred may be different to looking for the potential in Bertha, and that you as a leader need to be able to recognize that and to support them in what they need. In some ways, it's a Stephen Covey 8th habit, but I'd like to take it further in the sense that I believe that we're having a sense of purpose about what you're doing and wanting to make a qualitative and positive difference to your own life and to others, for me, is pretty fundamental. And it doesn't matter what you're producing. You know, somebody said to me on one occasion, okay, so but how is it a bank, you know, okay, they're a big, you know, corporate organization, how can there be an important why in that? You know, and the example might be, well, okay, you are servicing people's capacity to live. You can't live, certainly can't have a business without a bank account. So for me, if you're a bank and you want your staff to have a really great sense of purpose, then at the heart of it has to be your customer. How does that translate in terms of how you are interacting with and supporting your customer? Because if it doesn't ultimately have a direct link to that, what are you there for?
Yeah.
My purpose isn't to make your shareholders rich. A sense of purpose is going to be much more about how I can make a difference to people in the street on a day-by-day basis. And as a leader, it's looking at what is your why. And, you know, they've done a lot of work about research about motivation. And I think money comes 5th on the list of motivating factors.
Yeah, that would certainly be my experience in business. Yeah, with clients that I've worked with and in my own businesses as well.
Yeah, but people are motivated by having a sense of ownership and believing that what they do matters.
Well, I think on that note as well, the employment landscape has changed massively in the last 10 to 20 years in that sense, because certainly I've seen in the time that I've been employing people, employees want to feel like they're a part of something, like what they're doing is meaningful, like it matters. They don't just
Absolutely.
want to be a cog in the wheel anymore. Maybe they never did, or did to a lesser extent, or
Yeah.
it mattered less. I think culture's shifted a lot, but particularly now, it's not enough to just get somebody in, get them to do X, Y, and Z, and pay them a decent wage. They want to feel like what they're spending their time doing day to day is important, and there's a reason for it.
I don't know if you've read the book Lost Connections by Johan Hari
No,
about
I haven't.
depression. It's a really good book. I'd thoroughly recommend it.
I'm adding it to my Audible as we speak. Lost
Okay.
Connections.
And he talks about depression. It's quite scary because he starts off by looking at the research around antidepressants and how much of the research which showed that antidepressants don't work was buried.
Wow.
That's a whole conversation in itself. We could spend all day talking about that. But then he goes on to talk about what are the reasons why depression has exploded in terms of the numbers of people. Why is it people aren't feeling resilient? Why is it that so many people, half the prescriptions in the UK, antidepressants, and then when they don't work, they go back to the doctor and they're given more antidepressants. His view is that people are told it's not your fault, you've got a chemical imbalance in your brain. So it's not down to you. Take these pills and you'll be all right. And what he says that there is a proportion of people for whom there is actually a chemical imbalance, but it's a small proportion. And that actually it's life that's the problem. So people who've had abuse or trauma in their childhood are more likely, doesn't mean they will, but they're more likely to suffer from depression. People whose sense of purpose, their job particularly, and they don't see they're doing something that they feel has no purpose, that's a really big reason for being depressed. Interestingly, one of the little stories in there is a guy who mixes paint. This is in America. And he mixes paint for 8 hours a day and it's soulless and he hates it. And when he talks to him, he says, what would you like to do? He said, I'd like to run a fishing boat and take people out on fishing expeditions. And he says, why don't you do that? Now, I am paraphrasing it. And the reason is he doesn't want to give up his Mercedes. So Johan Hari then goes on to talk about the fact that we live by junk values these days. And by junk values, he means that you are seen to be more important if you're a celebrity. Your level of success is measured by your bank balance and not by what sort of person you are. That we make judgments about how fat, thin, tall people are. Designer products, shopping has become the new religion. And there's a lot about the book that for me really resonates when I think about the clients that I've worked with, whether I'm talking about individual clients, life coaching, or couple clients, or in the business context. If you get your values right, and if you live by those values, and one of the other things he says, if you're living in direct contradiction to your values, anxiety and depression are likely to be the result.
But we see that so much these days, don't we, where and not just in that area, but where the approach is to attempt to treat the symptoms or mask the symptoms rather than dealing with the root cause of the problem. Yeah, absolutely.
And people use food, they use drink, they use shopping, they use sex, they use drugs, all sorts of things.
Well, even prescription drugs, a scary statistic, 60% of the Western world is medicated on prescription drugs. That's insane. And even with antidepressants, in my experience as well, from people that I've known who've been through tough things or tough times in life, it's almost like GPs are giving out antidepressants like they're candy, just because, you don't feel so good. Right, well, here's a bunch of antidepressants. And they're horribly addictive. I really don't think they're effective. So I'd be very interested to read more and read into that book.
But when you look, I work with a lot of people who suffer from stress and depression. And when you start to analyze it, what they're dealing with is life. Life at times can be fairly, excuse the language, but shitty. That you have an accident, that you have significant illness, that a relationship breaks up, that you lose a loved one because they've died, you lose your job. It's part of life. And if we don't teach our children And we don't, as adults, if we immediately reach for somebody to anesthetize us from those feelings, you're never going to learn to deal with them.
No.
And the thing is, as parents, if that's the way they see you dealing with it, that's what they will expect.
Yeah.
And so this is an epidemic which is going to get worse unless something significant happens.
And alcohol is another big one to talk about, and drugs as well. But alcohol being legal, it's something that a lot of people go to as a way to self-medicate and to dull those feelings and to dull life without actually having to deal with it. I
wind down in the evening by having a glass, 2 glasses, a bottle of wine.
Yeah.
And, what they don't recognise is that, alcohol is an antidepressant. So you get the high, but you get a corresponding low that comes after it. And I think for many people that they're walking through life and they don't, 95% of everything that we think for most people is habitual. We go into these patterns of thinking. There's no real conscious thought. And for me, a big part of what I do is about waking people up to recognize that the quality of your thoughts determines the quality of your life.
Yes. 100%.
If you want a better life, better thoughts. And people say to me, how? Well, the first thing I would say to people is, instead of focusing on what you can't do and the terrible things in your life, focus on the great things. Because if you're in the Western world and if they're listening to something like this, the chances are you're in the top few % of the world in terms of living in a comfortable house with clean water, great plumbing, and enough to eat.
Yeah.
And for me, collecting gratitudes is a great way to recalibrate the brain. So if you get more of what you focus on, don't you? So I don't know if you've ever noticed, if you buy a new car of a particular make and colour, suddenly you start to see them on the road, don't you?
Yes, yeah.
Because your conscious thought is beginning to recognise those. But that's true of everything. And if you focus on how terrible life is and it's not fair and, that person's giving me a hard time, it will appear to get bigger. It takes up more and more of your attention. Whereas if you start to think about how even in my darkest day, there were still things to be grateful for. So for me, plumbing, I hate cold showers. Plumbing is a great sense of gratitude. Every morning I get under my shower and I say, thank you for the hot water. But if you go through the day, the natural world's another great one for me. Go through the day consciously looking for things to be grateful for. Make it easy. Mm-hmm. A phone call from a friend, an opportunity to speak to someone like you. That I am in a warm house, even though it's raining outside. That the spring flowers are popping up. And all the way through the day, collect those gratitudes. And of course, you have to be in the moment to do that. You can't be worrying about the past or anxious about the future. And then just before you go to bed, scan the day and choose your top 5, which means that when you go to sleep and your brain is processing the day, instead of focusing on your worries and all of the negatives, your brain will be focusing, at least initially, on the positives. Do that and do it consistently. 28 days, you'll create a new neural pathway. And there's a lot of research about neural plasticity, which says it doesn't matter how old you are, you can still learn new ways of thinking and new ways of being.
Absolutely.
And I urge listeners to try it. It's so easy, costs nothing, and it makes such a difference.
Another great piece of advice I heard, which I think bolts on nicely to that approach, is if we've all got stuff we're going through, we're dealing with, and some more so than others, and some of those things are quite tough to deal with. They're quite terrible things. That's life. But a great strategy to bolt on to the gratitude collection that you were just talking about is to give yourself a 30-minute slot or a 20-minute slot or an hour if you need it to think about and deal with those terrible things in your life, the things that are bugging you, the things that you're anxious about, but rather than let it consume your entire day, to say, right, do you know what, I've got some time between 10 and half 10 this morning, I'm going to sit down with a cup of tea, a notepad perhaps and a pen, and I'm just going to go there in my thoughts. I'm going to go into these things that are bothering me, that are troubling me, these tough things that I'm going through in my life, and I'm going to set time aside to work through them in my own mind.
I mean, doing that brain dump and putting it on paper is really helpful in the sense that you're emptying your head of all of that rubbish. But then if you went through that with a highlighter pen What of this is, okay, use a green highlighter pen. What can I do something about in the short term? What's within my control? And if you can't change things, what you can do is change your reaction to it. Okay, so that's a green highlighter. I'm not sure, I believe this is in my control. I'm not sure what to do about it yet, but I could think that's down to me. And then in red, I can't change it. There's nothing I can do about it. I've either got to accept it or not. And then at least out of that, you've got an action plan in terms of some simple things that you can do to make a difference. And I think it's when we start to take action. And, that's it's my theory that one of the reasons why the Brits love to make a cup of tea. Because when things are desperate, usually the things, I'll put the kettle on. And you break state, don't you? You actually physically get up and you break state and you go and you do something. And it's a task that has a beginning, a middle and an ending. And you have a sense of satisfaction because you've done it.
Yes.
And the principles of that are true, on a much bigger scale too. We're the common denominator in our lives, aren't we? We're with us from the moment we're conceived to the moment we die.
100%.
Okay, so doesn't it make sense then to give ourselves permission not to be the victim of our own lives, but actually to be the hero or heroine, to take control of our own lives? And as I say, even if you can't, I couldn't control the fact that I needed to use a wheelchair, and I still do if I go out into the town. I can walk short distances now. I couldn't change that. But I sure as hell could change my attitude to that person who wouldn't get into a wheelchair at Wisley Gardens to one where I actually see my wheelchair as my chariot on fire. Because I never do anything apart from be at full speed, I have to tell you. And for me, disability is a metaphor for life. If you think you can't, then it's done deal, isn't it?
We don't even try.
If you think it's possible, then you're like, you should try it. I mean, Roger Bannister, the first 4-minute miler. People watching this may not be aware that he was told by the medics of the time that if he ran that fast, he was going to die. And if you look at the footage, there are men in white coats holding oxygen bottles. They thought at least they'd give it a try to resuscitate him. Now, that he ran the race at all, I find amazing. What I find even more amazing is that within a month, 30 other people had done the same.
Yeah.
Why? Because they believed they could. And so I would say to people listening to this, what are the limiting beliefs that keep you stuck? And we've all got them. Every single one of them has got them. But you don't have to keep them. They are just a perception. If you change the belief, then you change your reality. And if I may, I'd like to share a story of a really dramatic, for me at least, way that this really got brought home to me. I'd left school as a head, and I'd done a research project and was now working with businesses. And I also became an NLP master practitioner, neuro-linguistic programming. And I wanted to I'd done it all with the same organisation, so I wanted to go and watch other people using NLP. And I ended up at the Excel Centre in London, and Tony Robbins, who's perhaps one of the most famous motivating speakers, was running a course at the Excel Centre. I arrived and there were 10,000 people on the course, which in itself was mind-blowing. Now, I went very cynically thinking, big American bloke, lots of hype, it's not going to work.
And big's an understatement when it comes to Tony Robbins.
Yeah.
What year was this?
Big. Sorry?
What year?
2006.
2006, okay.
Okay. So I want you to recognise that I had gone there probably not with the best attitude towards this. I was waiting for my belief about this to be proved right. Okay. How wrong can one be? In the morning of the first day, Tony Robbins was talking about a program that he was running in America a few weeks later, and I really liked the sound of it, but I dismissed it. How would I manage? In those days, they didn't have an electric travel chair. How would I manage the journey it was in California, blah-de-blah-de-blah. And even though I did all of these jobs outside school, it was always with a taxi from my house to the place with the same taxi driver. So very safe. I dismissed it. Now, on the first day, we did the fire walk. And for those people who are not familiar with that, you walk across hot coals in bare feet, about 30 feet, And if you're in the right mindset, you don't get burnt. Okay? Sounds like madness, but it works. Now, those days, I'd had a spinal stimulator fitted on in 2004. I could walk a few steps unaided, but I was blooming determined I was going to do this firewall. So with somebody each side helping me, because my balance was so poor, I managed the firewall. And I was thrilled to have done it. I sat down in my chair, and the guy behind me was in a wheelchair. He was a double amputee, no legs below the knee. He tipped himself up onto his hands, and he did the firewalk on his hands.
Oh, wow.
I was humbled. I was blown away. And I realized if he could do that, I have no idea who he is, I could go to America. That night I booked my flight, I booked my ticket. I went off and did Date with Destiny. I did all Tony Robbins stuff, became a senior team leader. What I recognized in that moment of watching that man was I was self-limiting, and we all do it. I've shared this story with thousands of people, and reports back is it's made them think, and I hope it will make the people who are watching or listening to this think. If you limit your life, the only person responsible for that is you. If you're going to write your life story, and we're all the author of our life story, make yourself a hero and not a victim. It's your choice. Because even when terrible things happen to you, you can still choose how you deal with it. And I'm not for a moment saying that it's easy. I know from my personal journey, it ain't. But it is possible. And it's possible when you believe it's possible.
I think a lot of it comes down to that acceptance that life is difficult. It isn't easy, to expect it to be this walk in the park or, excuse the pun, but, we want to believe that it's just going to be this great experience and we shouldn't have all these hardships. But really, even with all the hardships we have in the modern day, we've never lived in a more exciting, more free, more affluent time. We're so lucky, especially in the Western world, to have access to all the things that we have access to. And a bit of perspective, I think, really helps. And if we can just start from the point of view of actually life is inherently difficult. There are shit times that we've all got to go through and will have to go through. There's going to be peaks where we feel great and troughs where we feel like utter crap. But that's the journey, and we can learn and grow just as much in those troughs as we can at our peaks. But we've got to embrace it.
I think we grow more in the troughs, personally.
I agree.
And what I would say to you is that I don't think that you can appreciate the highs if you've had no lows. And I think one of the things that many people do is that they are frightened of facing their emotions, and your exercise is a really good one of sitting with it. And it's not the emotions themselves, I think, that cause the damage. It's the judgments that we make about those. These are bad emotions. For me, an emotion is an opportunity to learn. So, the emotion of guilt, well, that's a lesson. Don't do it again. Put it right and don't do it again. If you're angry, what are you doing with that anger? Because anger in itself is not wrong. It's how people actually manifest that anger. Anger is usually a sign that something is at variance with your values. Now, whether we agree with people's values or not, that's a whole different question. But actually, anger is a call to action. I would always say no aggression. I'd always say that it's about how do you deal with that problem, but do it in a way that is a win-win situation. I don't believe in aggression that is ever the answer to anything. It just creates, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, leads to a lot of blind, toothless people, doesn't it?
I love that. How do you, you're absolutely right in what you're saying. When you are confronted with those times in life when your back's up against the wall and you're dealing with someone who's particularly antagonizing or frustrating, what are the tactics or strategies that you employ to keep your cool and keep your calm and stay away from tipping over into that side of aggression? I
think when you practice being consciously thinking, you don't immediately assume the motive that they're trying to get at you. And I think that's really important, because very often when people are agitated and angry, and being difficult, as we see it, it's very rarely is it personal. It's usually that they feel aggrieved, that they don't feel listened to, that there's a problem that they're struggling to deal with. And so I think one of the easiest things, you have to keep yourself under control first. Neutral body language, neutral voice, and really hold the space, and to say very gently, I can see you're really agitated. I can see that there's a problem. Come and sit down. Let's talk about it. I promise you I will listen. I can't promise that I can solve it, but I will listen. And in that listening, the angst, the anxiety, the aggression usually gets diffused. And then you can actually sort out what is the real problem here. But usually people meet fire with fire. They are intrinsically uncomfortable with somebody else's excess emotional place, whatever that might be. And that triggers in them uncertainty, and then that triggers their own emotional baggage, and you end up with two people both triggering each other's habitual way of being. That's what happens in lots of relationships. I do relationship coaching. Very often somebody said something, but it's in the tone of voice of a naggy parent. How often have you heard the saying, it's not what they say, it's the way in which they say it?
Yes.
So for me, it's about, you have to manage yourself first, be very neutral, and be prepared to listen. That's why we've got two ears and one mouth, but we rarely listen twice as much as we talk.
Very true. How would you reconcile if you're dealing with someone in that way and you're keeping your cool and making it more about them and trying to understand them, but they're just not giving any space, and they continue to be aggressive and continue to, if it turns into a very one-sided exchange, is there a point where you would walk away? Or
it's perfectly appropriate to say to that person, look, I absolutely appreciate that you are really, really angry or whatever, but I don't think carrying on this conversation is going to be helpful. So can I suggest that that we'll make another time, get yourself together, go and make yourself a cup of tea. A lot will depend on the status that you have within that argument. So if we're talking about in a situation where you have high status, it's very easy to say, I'm terminating this conversation, go and get yourself together, and then we will reconvene.
Yeah.
If you are subordinate, that's much more difficult. Or at least people perceive it as being more difficult. And I think, once again, you can say, look, if you're the subordinate, I want to hear what you're saying, but I'm finding this very, very difficult. Can I suggest that we actually have a bit of time to cool off and then come back? But I do appreciate that if you're in a subordinate role, that is quite difficult. If that's constantly happening, you have to decide whether you're working in the right place. And there are occasions when actually what you need to do is go and find yourself another job.
Yeah. How would you make that decision? When is enough enough? When is too much too much?
It's going to be dependent upon the individual, I think. And a lot of people say I've tried when they played lip service to trying. I'm reminded of us working with a client who said how dreadful her boss was, and her boss was always having a go at her, and how it was unfair. And I did an exercise with her, which is something that again, people who were watching this can do. And I did it by physically moving her from chair to chair. But you can do this in your head. If you have two chairs facing one another, and you sit in the chair and be yourself, looking and imagining that you're seeing your boss or the other person, it doesn't have to be the boss. And I want you to say, what's on your mind? What's really getting on you? Go, what's the problem? Okay? Then get up and shake yourself. Then go and sit in the other chair. Take some deep breaths, close your eyes, and imagine you're that other person. What's their perspective? How do they see the situation? And then, having done that, get yourself up, stand up, give yourself a wriggle. Then stand outside the two as an independent observer. What do you see going on between the two of these? Because you'll have a different perspective. And then go back to your seat being you and say, what have you learned? What are you going to do? And it's my experience that when people really enter into that and they get the different perspective, that they will recognize whether there is there is a way forward. Interestingly, with this woman, her words more or less quoted were, "My God, I can see that she's seen that I'm just behaving like a stroppy teenager." Now, in that situation, we talked about how she would change her behaviours in order to, instead of being sullen and sulky and difficult, to go to her boss on a Monday morning and saying, "Right, anything else you need me to do this week? These are the things I've got to do. How can I help you?" And the relationship between her and her boss was transformed very quickly. And it continues to be transformed because she's consistent in that approach.
Yeah, that perspective is so important, isn't it? Stepping outside of yourself and your own, because your emotions can act like a fog and get in the way a lot of the time, can't they?
Now, I think it's really important for me to say I don't condone bad behaviour, all right? Don't condone it at all. But if you recognise that, for example, if you're a middle manager and your senior manager is being really, really difficult, the chances are that they're under pressure externally and they're not coping with it and they're just sending the pressure down the line.
Yeah.
And so part of that may be, well, okay, if that's the case, having the conversation, what do I need to do to help you? And if you're a team member of the middle manager, the same. You know, if you're dealing with parents, you know, you can't sack your parents, you know, but I've had many clients who've got really difficult, toxic relationships with their parents. You can't change the other person. The only thing you can do is change you. But what's really interesting is once you start to do things differently, very often that creates a change in that other person. Because in previous times, you've both been going into your unconscious dance of having habitual ways of dealing with one another. And if it's somebody that is in your family, it's amazing. Instead of rowing with them, say, "I'm really sorry, can I give you a hug?" Suddenly they're disarmed because you've stepped out of your normal pattern of behaviour, which is to shout back or flounce out of the room and slam the door.
Yeah.
Now, it may not be appropriate to do that with your boss or with your team member, but I think that if you have really, really, and you've got to be honest with yourself, if you have looked at changing your perspective, changing the way in which you respond to what's going on, and you are still not getting anywhere, and it's affecting your health and well-being, then I would say it's time to look for another job. But to do that in a measured way, rather than flounce out and give you notice in, start looking for a job whilst you're still in employment, because it's research shows it's easier to do that if you're in employment, then people look on your application form more favourably. It's not the end of the world if it's really that bad. But if it's got to that bad, my question is, what have you been doing in the interim? We rarely go from 0 to 90 miles an hour instantly. There's usually a build-up. And what often happens is people ignore it, thinking it will go away, rather than looking at what they can do. Remember, you have the power to determine how you're going to behave. You don't have the power to determine how anyone else is going to behave.
Yeah.
So you've got to be honest with yourself about how you're contributing to that situation, and choose to do things differently. And amazingly, the vast majority of situations improve if you change the way in which you're behaving, if you start to manage your emotions in a different way and do that consciously and mindfully.
Yeah, and it comes down to what you were touching on before, that you don't have any control of or really anything outside of yourself. You know, other people's behavior, their thoughts, their feelings, what they say, the way they act. But what you do have complete control over is how you choose to react to that, how you choose to perceive that. So that perspective, how that can help expand your perception and help you to understand other people better, why they're behaving the way that they are, why they're doing the things that they're doing, and then help you then to choose a better way to react to that, choose a better way to respond, because they're responding to you as well. And if you're meeting them with confrontation, if you're meeting them at their level, then that's only going to fuel the fire. But if you can take a step back and stay true to your values, and that can be difficult sometimes, but it's really powerful stuff.
And if you're working in an organization where the values are at variance with your own, I think, and you recognize that. And sometimes you don't recognize it till you start working there, but the culture is not for you, then you need to take action. And if you're not a senior decision maker, trying to change the culture from a low, by low, I don't mean unimportant, but in terms of low status, it's quite difficult. And you have to make the decision whether or not you want to try and work on changing the culture within your own team and spreading that out. And it is possible, but it's your decision whether that's what you want to do, or whether you would rather go and find someone where the culture is more in line with your own. And that's going to be different for everybody. And a lot of that will depend on your financial status, whether you've got family and children, geography. Nobody can make that decision for you. But I would say if you're applying for a job, then do your best to find out what that culture is before you start. And I think people see interviews very one way. And actually, you can tell a lot from the way in which you're being interviewed as to whether the culture of that place is going to be for you.
Yeah, because it's more than just the pay, the salary, the benefits, location. Yeah. It's how are you going to feel? It's the environment. How are you going to feel being in that environment? Because we spend a lot of time there when we're working in an organization. Yeah. 8, 9, 10 hours a day, perhaps 5 days a week, 6 days a week, maybe even. That's a significant portion of your life to be in an environment which is either going to build you up and help you to develop and support you, or alternatively be negative and toxic and break you down.
And of course, these days, people don't finish work when they finish work with the internet, with emails, with social media. There is an expectation in many organisations that you are actually going to be available 24/7. And many people find it really difficult to recognise the off button on their phone and their computer. And if you're a boss here, I would say to you, do yourself a favour and your staff, be very clear about where the boundary is, and unless it's an emergency, that nobody's expected to answer emails or answer texts or phone calls, and you need to define what constitutes an emergency. Because if you don't, somebody can't find a bit of information, it'll be an emergency. Somebody can't find a phone number, it'll be an emergency. So as a team, as an organisation, define what an emergency is, and then have a moratorium on using electronics for work in people's downtime. Again, lots of research that shows that people who go and actually unwind, go and do things, have hobbies, have interests outside work, come back better resourced, more creative, better problem solvers and solution finders, healthier. So again, if you're a boss and you're writing emails at 11 o'clock at night, first question is why? Secondly, that then puts pressure on everybody else, that they think that they've got to do the same. And actually it's counterproductive.
It is, and it's something you see a lot of. It's a bit of a conditioning thing, I think, whereby entrepreneurs, business owners, they see that there's almost this stigma of not burning the candle at both ends, and sleep is for when you're dead, and this kind of attitude. I'm up at 4:30 a.m. and I hit the gym, and then I'm in work by 6 ahead of everybody else. And I think it's one thing to measure your success by the amount of time you spend in your seat, and quite another to measure it by what you actually achieve. For the way you view your staff as well, it's not about how much or how long they're in the office for, because you could have people who are in the office for 12 hours a day but are achieving sod all in the grand scheme of things.
It's the difference between being busy and being productive, isn't it?
Yeah.
I've arrived at work and I've clocked in. Okay, and
then I'm going to go make a cup of tea and have a chat in the staff room, and then I'll maybe check my emails or have a look on BBC News for half an hour. It's like, well, yeah, you might be in from 7 till 7, but you're not that productive.
I was asked a while ago to be interviewed on Taiwan radio, because they'd seen my work around workaholics. Work, not alk, I have to say. And they are very worried there, because the culture of the country is people are not taking their holidays, even though they only get 2 weeks a year, because they're worried that somebody else will replace them. Now, the pressure for you to be there, to be present, even if you're not being particularly productive, because you feel so undervalued that if you're not physically present, they'll get rid of you and put somebody else in your place, I think is incredibly toxic and worrying.
Yeah.
But I think there's more and more sense of that in America and the UK.
Yeah, it's a terrible way to have to live your life if you're worried about things like that. And I think, it comes down to the organization, down to the leadership in order to put things in place that protects against that. It's a culture thing. It's about changing that culture and shifting those perceptions and making it very clear that I always used to say to people, you've got to have your holidays. You've got to have your time off.
Model the behaviors that you want from other people.
Yes. Yeah. Lead by example.
Yeah. Walk your talk. Not too many people talk their talk, and it sounds good, but there's nothing to underpin it or sustain it.
Walk your talk. I think that's a great place to wind this up, and I just want to say thank you so much. It's been a really insightful conversation. I've really enjoyed chatting to you. And final thing is to just throw it over to you, Gina. Where can people connect with you and find out more about what you do?
Thanks very much. If you go to the general website, that's genuinely, then a hyphen and the word u.com, genuinely-u.com. And there's lots of free resources, and you can find all of my programs there. If you're interested in enlightened leadership, then go to enlightenedleadership.co, enlightenedleadership.co. Very interested for people who would like to participate and know more about that, set up a call. Or if you're interested in being an affiliate, then you can direct message me through Facebook, Genuinely You. There's a Facebook group there. Or you can do it through the website. So genuinely-u.com, enlightenedleadership.co. Thanks very much indeed.
Wonderful. And what kind of people are you looking for?
In terms of the Enlightened Leadership Programme?
Yeah, and the affiliate stuff that you were talking about.
People, well, in terms of the Enlightened Leadership Programme, business owners who actually want to make a positive difference to their staff and leave a living legacy, if you like, and who want to be able to have successful businesses at the same time to lead with integrity, compassion, and the courage to do what's right, not necessarily what's easy. Or if the people in HR making the decisions and want to develop their managers, then they would be perfect candidates, whether they're emerging or more experienced managers. The number of people who are involved in tribunals and so on is growing. If you know that you've got problems in your organisation, this would be an ideal program for people to do. It's 10 months long. They're supported by leadership facilitators on a one-to-one basis. There's videos, PowerPoint presentations, activities. It's all done online. The geography doesn't matter. Affiliates, if it's something that you believe in, that wanting the quality of leadership to make a difference. For me, this is so much about not just about the leadership, but our personal and spiritual journey too, and that you have contact. My view is I'd rather pay affiliates a 10% of the fee of the course than I pay faceless marketers. And so affiliates will get 10% of the program fee plus 10% of anything people spend with Genuinely You thereafter. And our plan is to have retreats and mastermind groups and so on, so that relationship continues. Ultimately, I want a program for young people and parents, but I need enlightened leaders to go through the program, so we have the infrastructure and we have people to act as mentors for that program. So that's the long-term dream. But if you're interested in enlightenedleadership.co, genuinely-u.com, I'd love to speak to you.
Wonderful. If that's you, please do get in touch, connect with Gina. I'll put all of the links to Gina's websites and her Facebook and LinkedIn on the show notes. So if you're at all interested in that, please go and check the show notes and connect with her there. Gina, you've been phenomenal. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure too.
Gina Gardiner, ladies and gentlemen, what a fabulous lady. Definitely knows her stuff when it comes to relationships, communication and leadership, and I thoroughly enjoyed that. I hope you did too. Listen, if anything that she said in today's show resonated with you, then please do go and connect with her on social media, if only just to support the great work that she's doing. And if you want to learn more about what she does, then as I said, all the links to Gina's projects and programs will be in the show notes, so you can go and find out more there. Get in touch with her, and if you want to become an affiliate for her program, just connect with her on LinkedIn or Facebook and DM her, as the kids say today. Send her a direct message, and she'll send you all the details. Definitely sounds like she's doing some great work, and obviously very knowledgeable when it comes to leadership and building excellence and relationships and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, go and connect, get it done. Next episode is going to be with I'm going to struggle to say this name as well. Cabal Chaballout. Chabballout. Chaballout. I can't say that. I'm going to have to ask him to help me say that. Anyway, Cabal. We'll just call him Cabal. Cabal is a positive mindset coach certified by Ericsson Coaching International. He has an MBA in International Healthcare Management. He's from the Frankfurt School of Finance and Management as well. So a guy who's relatively well decorated, and he's the creator of the Effortless Effectiveness Coaching System, which is a proven method that supports individuals in transforming their aspirations and dreams into reality. So yeah, looking forward to having Cabal on the show on the next episode. So I think he's going to be coming to us live from the US and Canada as well. So he's another international guest coming on the show, which is cool as fuck. Yeah, so that's going to be the next episode. If you've enjoyed the show today, guys, remember to go and subscribe on iTunes and Spotify and all the places that you are listening to this. Leave us a review as well, because it fills me with, gives me a little warm, tingly feeling inside and makes me feel all good. And it's a lovely reward for all the hard work I put into producing this show. But more importantly, it also helps other people find good quality content in the sea of content that is out there these days. So go and leave a review for the show. Get subscribed so you get future episodes beamed into your phone or whatever smart device you're using. And if you're a business owner, if you are in business, if you run any kind of business, go and download the Bulletproof Business app. You can just search Bulletproof on the Android Google Play Store and on the App Store. Or you can go to bit.ly/Bulletproof Business on the Apple, if you're on Apple. And you can go to bit.ly/Bulletproof Android if you're a filthy Android user. Why go and download the app? Because it is full of great content, tools, tips, and resources to help you grow a bulletproof business in 2020. There are planning forms on there. There are all of these podcast episodes on there. All of my best content is on there. You get direct access to me through the messaging feature. And not only that, but the first 1,000 people to set up a profile, download and actively set up a profile. You can sign in with Facebook or just create a profile. It's dead easy, dead quick, and it's completely free. And for the first 1,000 users to do that, as a thank you for being the first in the app, you get lifetime access to all the features and benefits of the app forever. It doesn't get much cooler than that, ladies and gents. So go and check that out. If you want to talk to me about my construction business mastermind, my mini masterminds, which I'm throwing out across the UK now, affordable masterminds for just £60 a month for startups, early stage businesses, mumpreneurs, and all that kind of thing, people who generally get priced out of the market, then you can get in touch with me about that at jamie@optimizemenow.com. You can message me through the Bulletproof app. It's probably the best and quickest way to get hold of me. Or you can go to one of the groups on Facebook, or just find me on Facebook and then you'll see my groups. It's as simple as that. I've got the Construction Business Mastermind group on Facebook and the Bulletproof Mini Mastermind group there as well. But just search Jamie Keeling and you'll either see me sitting in a white circle or with a big cheesy grin and a red background. I'm on LinkedIn as well, so go and connect with me there. That, ladies and gentlemen, is it for today. Thanks very much for supporting the show. Thank you very much for listening. And until next time, stay optimized.